elementary school.
I lived there twice.
We are going to start, yes.
Okay, everybody find a seat, please.
Yes, we have a few seats in here still. And we have some more empty chairs if we need more chairs.
There's also one seat here and one.
And there's also the tub bench.
Okay, so,
This is Bob Rubner. He is from New York, but he started coming up this way because of being very interested in Joseph Plum Martin. And a number of years ago, he was talking with one of the older folks on the Cape at the time, Maynard Farnham, and he found out that Maynard had one of the original 1830 copies of Joseph Plum Martin's book. That had come down in his wife's family. And a while later, Maynard gave Bob the book, which he returned to us last year. And it is upstairs, it's been put in an archival container.
I can use yours.
But it was quite a joy to have that back here. And at the time, he said he would be willing to do a program on tidal mills, which we had at least one of here in town, down on the Cape. And that's what he's got set up for us today. So we'll turn it over to him and thank him and welcome his wife here too.
Thank you.
okay, now, before we start,
Certainly. That's okay.
here's a booklet for you. Before we start, I just want to say a very quick word about J.P. Martin, because that's what got me interested here. And I have a reprint of his book. Doesn't show up, so I'm going to read the last paragraph of his introduction to his book, which he wrote, I think it was around 1840 or something like that. He said he wrote it for the young people in his congregation. I have read online that he wrote because he needed some money, had it printed in Halliwell. Both of those facts could be true. They don't contradict each other. But he was such an interesting fellow, self-educated for the most part. And I want to read it. As to punctuation, my narrative is in the same predicament as it is in respect to other parts of grammar. I never learned the rules of punctuation any farther than just to assist in fixing a comma to the British depredations in the state of New York, a semicolon in New Jersey, a colon in Pennsylvania, and a final period in Virginia. A note of interrogation, why we were made to suffer so much in so good and just a cause, and a note of admiration to all the world that an army voluntarily engaged to serve their country when starved and naked and suffering everything short of death, and thousands even that, should be able to persevere through an 8 years' war and come off conquerors at last. But lest I should make my preface longer than my story, I will here bring it to a close. I think that's pretty good for an amateur author, J.P. Martin. So after we honor him like that way, talk a little bit about tide mills. Now, down on Long Island, it's flat for the most part. Up here, you've got mountains all over the place. Now, a mountain is a sponge when rain falls on and the water runs off. And as it runs down the mountain, you can build a mill and The mill wheel will turn with the weight of water in the buckets. That's an overshot wheel. And if the bigger you make the overshot wheel, the more power you get from the force of gravity filling those buckets. But on Long Island, you don't have mountains to speak of. You might get a hill once in a while. There are very few places where you can get a 10-foot drop of water, which is the minimum for an overshot wheel with buckets, which is the most efficient kind of wheel. But what you have is, especially on the north shore of Long Island, many, many little indents coves. And if you put a dam across the cove, you create a lake. And then you have a way of trapping the water. And when the tide goes down 8 feet almost, around Long Island, that's not very much compared to here, I'm sure. Now you have a difference in height, and you have all that water available. Can't run an overshot wheel, but it can go under the wheel and hit the float boards, which is just like a Mississippi River boat in reverse. Instead of the paddles pushing the water back, you have the water pushing the paddles around, and that runs your mill. Okay, now if you look at your booklet, this is the same booklet that I used for the showing the mill. And if you go to page 4, you'll see a diagram of one of the tide gates. Okay, get this so it looks right. Okay, that's one of the 2 tide gates that let water into a pond which had 15 or 16 acres of area. Now, they placed the dam in such a way that they trapped that amount of area. And that amount was important. Now, 15 or 16 acres comes out to something like 560,000 square feet. I once figured it out, how many square feet in an acre, you know. And when you run the mill dam, and the water gushes under that wheel, now the wheel, the way in that diagram that I drew long ago, the wheel is sort of half underwater, so it wouldn't be working now. That's the way, that's high tide, nothing's happening now. But when the tide goes down and the wheel is free of the water behind the mill can rush under the wheel and turn it. And about 36 to 40 cubic feet per second will gush in a ribbon of water, maybe 9 inches high, 8 inches high, 4 feet wide, and hit the floats of that wheel. And if that works for about 4 hours, you'll use up about 560,000 cubic feet. So the pond will drop about 1 foot. That's all you need. The whole mill pond doesn't drop all the way down because you want as much height of water for as much pressure as possible to turn that undershot wheel. So what you do is you use the ocean to supply lots of water. You build a mill pond that has enough area so that it will run the wheel at low tide for a while. Now, the tides don't go up and down evenly, as you know. It starts to come down slowly, then faster and faster and faster, and then it slows down, and when it's at the bottom, it slowly comes up. And while it's down there low and beginning to come up, now your mill wheel is clear, and you can open the sluice gate. Now, what is that? We'll turn to the next page, which is page 6. We'll open the sluice gate. It slides up among those 2 side things that have grooves in them, and a little bit of that is still left at the mill, just a little bit. You can see it measures exactly 4 feet between the grooves. And there was a device with a rope, and you could use a lever to turn this log that would raise a board called the sluice gate and let the water rush under the wheel. So that's the way you got power to the mill. Now, on Long Island, with all those coves, they estimate something like maybe 60 of those tide mills were operating just on Long Island North Shore alone. And then the Connecticut shore has about the same tide rise in the Long Island Sound, and they had some of these things too. The South Shore of Long Island is flatter, and you didn't have the same drop, but all you need is a couple feet of drop, and you can get some sort of power to turn an undershot wheel. Now, on the next page, on page 7, shows you an arrangement of how the water was brought to the wheel. Okay, thank you for enlarging it. First of all, we're looking from the mill pond side, and that trap was a bunch of thin pieces of wood, laths you might say, and that would trap any debris that might float over and clog up the sluice gate. You'll notice that the little canal leading up to the wheel, the race or the canal, is fairly wide. It was usually lined with oak plank. And you might think, why do you need such a big canal? Well, because the water flowing through a narrow opening has friction, fluid friction, what they call laminar flow. In other words, next to the sides it goes slower. You lose speed, and therefore you lose energy. But by having a very wide canal, all of the pressure of the water is saved until it goes through that sluice gate and rushes against the bottom of the wheel, usually hitting 2 floats at a time. Now, once that wheel is turning, it's going in a vertical direction, and you have to convert it to horizontal because millstones are horizontal. And so there are gears inside the building which effect that change of direction. And those gears in this particular mill, which we call the Van Wyck Lefferts Tidal Mill, are still original, although they have had some wearing parts replaced. The original arrangement is still there, and it's the only tide mill that I know of in the country that has that much in the way of original parts. Okay, now in the center of the center fold of your booklet, you will see the arrangement. Okay, now here we could probably zoom out a little bit. Okay, this is what they call an isometric diagram, and it was made around 1776, which was the centennial year of the country, remember? This diagram was part of a study by the Historic American Engineering Record. And these records are with the Smithsonian now. And this diagram was made by a lady who is a draftswoman, whatever you would like to say, without any aid of computers naturally. Everything there is drawn entirely by hand, perfectly. Quite an accomplishment of draftsmanship. And the wheel itself, you can see the floats, the boards, and how that is all. The information for that is taken from photographs, old photographs of the mill after it had ceased being used, but it was still pretty much intact. In the upper left-hand corner, you can see a diagram of a lower millstone with grooves in it, but they call them furrows, like a furrow that is plowed in the ground, you know. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Those furrows have 2 functions, or maybe 3. One of them is to help in breaking the wheat kernels up gradually, because the furrows had a slanting bottom, and that slant served to gradually break the bran off apart from each wheat seed. Then the direction of the furrows was such that when the upper millstone and the lower millstone turned, they would nudge the material out to the periphery, to the outside of the stones, and the product being introduced through that hole in the top of the upper millstone would move out to the outside, and then it would be collected from there. All circular millstones, even very primitive ones, turned by hand, have the meal, the ground material, come out all around the edges, you know. In fact, it's even referred to, believe it or not, in the Bible, where they talk about the plagues in Egypt, and they talk about how all the firstborn were killed on one night, from Pharaoh down to the maid who stands behind the mill. And what was she doing standing behind the mill? She was scraping that meal from all around the millstone and putting it in some container. So as those millstones turn, the meal, the ground material, falls out all around. Okay, now, getting ahead a little bit, skipping some details, let's take a look at page 10, just to talk about those furrows. This arrangement of furrows wasn't used quite as often, but it's very effective. It was found more in Europe, as a matter of fact, but I have seen right in this area old millstones. I think it was in Bucksport, which did have this tangential arrangement of the furrows. And you can see the upper millstone has been put up on edge, and in the center of the upper millstone you can see a little piece of triangular iron. The lower millstone has you can see a sort of a metal washer with grooves in it, and coming up the middle of through the bottom millstone, you had a shaft, and that shaft rotated the upper millstone, and when those furrows crossed, they nudged the material out to the periphery. And then over here, let's see, you have a downspout, and because the whole thing was surrounded by a hoop, it acted like a blower. The moving upper millstone created a draft, and it worked like a hairdryer. Air came in through the top hole, and since it was enclosed, that air running around was picking up the loose meal, and it shot down this chute here, the downspout. And now you have meal hot and damp, because there's about 12% water in wheat, you know, and mixed with bran, and it's coming down and getting, and you have to collect it somehow, right? Now, before 1800 roughly, 1795, you'd have to collect it in a bin or bag or something. You have to sift the bran out of the flour. Of course, now the flour, it wasn't all fine flour such as you buy today. You had the germ mixed in with it, okay? That was whole wheat. By the way, does anybody have that? Oh, here it is. Here's some samples of the different materials. Newcomers could look at this, and you can see that these are wheat seeds, you know. They're about a little less than a 1/4 inch long, and maybe roughly 1/8 of an inch wide, and they have a deep groove in it. And this stuff is hard, you know. If you ever try and rub two flat stones together and try and break them apart, you see it's not easy. And so the upper millstone has to be real heavy to accomplish that, and you need plenty of power, and crucially, you need the right number of wheat seeds in between the stones for the amount of power available. Now, if you allow too much wheat to run down through the hole in the upper stone, and you create more work than the mill can do. it had limited power. So one of the miller's tasks was to adjust the rate of feed and also to adjust how much of the upper millstone's weight is bearing on the lower millstone. And there were ways of adjusting it with a device that could actually raise the upper millstone while it was turning. And so there is a diagram which is not in the book, but which I'm going to try and find for you, that accomplished that. I don't know whether we can get this on the screen, but we'll try. Okay.
You got it.
Okay, now you see there are 3 levers involved. We're not showing the supporting structure. All this was attached to the building naturally, you know. But starting with the upper millstone, remember that thing weighs a ton, all right? It's resting on that vertical shaft. That vertical shaft is resting on a wooden beam that has a little box in the bottom, a little cast iron box lined with lignum vitae, which is a low friction material when seawater hits it. Or you could put butter there or oil or what have you. And that shaft is being turned by a great big gear attached to the mill wheel through a couple of links. But okay, that's turning. Now it's resting on the bridge tree, and that in turn is resting on the brayer. That's the one on the bottom. The brayer has this iron link that goes up to a horizontal long pole there, which was the lighter staff. And the lighter staff has a weight. It's a bag with a leather belt, and that bag weighs 60 pounds. And if you move it back and forth, it raises or lowers the lever. And all those levers have the effect of raising that upper millstone a little bit or lowering it a little bit as you move the bag back and forth, left and right. So that's pretty clever. And how much do you have to raise the upper millstone? Not even 1/4 of an inch. But it makes all the difference in the world. And so that's how you balance the pressure on the ground material being ground, with the amount of power available. As far as adjusting the amount of water that's hitting the water wheel, apparently in this undershot situation, they left it alone. And so you would want to get the mill turning the right speed and having all these adjustments done correctly. And so even before they did some automation on these mills, which I could get to a little bit later, there was a kind of a rule of thumb which is quoted in a book about the material, which I'd like to find you. Let's see if I can get it. Give me a moment, please. There's always, when you want to find it, you can't find it. But it's funny. Just a minute. It's too bad we don't have a commercial. No.
I have tickets for the raffle if anybody wants to buy one. They're $10. It's right over there. I've got 4 on me.
Okay, so anyway, all right, here it is. All right, this is what they told the miller. Okay, everybody ready? Everybody ready? Okay, here's what you tell the miller when he's adjusting his millstones. If the motion be too great, then add a little feed and wait. That'll slow it down, right? But if the motion be too slow, less feed and wait. We'll let her go. Okay, there it is. Look at the old typeface. You see that the word on the bottom, less and feed, those S's look like F's. Less feed and wait, we'll let her go. So in other words, you can cut down on the amount of wheat seeds getting between the stones, and you can move the lever to raise that upper millstone just a little bit, take a little pressure off. And so that was the miller's art, and that gives you an idea of what was necessary for good quality flour. Now, the other thing that was necessary for quality flour was that the millstones had to be rough. Okay, now you do enough milling and the little spaces between the high points get filled in and gets kind of glazed, and now it's crushing the grain rather than grinding it. So what you have to do then is lift up the upper millstone, turn it around, and resurface it. And how is that done? By dropping a sharp chisel onto the stone, one stroke at a time, and roughing it up. But more than roughing it up, you really also had to make sure that it was absolutely level and flat.
There you go, upside down.
Let's see now.
Do you want that?
Yeah, let's take this one.
Okay.
Can we do that? Okay. All right, now we have a picture of a miller. He's up in Canada. He was up in Canada. He's a Quebec man, and he was running a mill which was installed in the Canadian Outdoor Museum. He and his father were in the business for 40 years doing milling and baking. And you can see he's got a hammer. He's not using the chisel thing, but the mill had to have a collection of maybe 10 chisels, which had to be resharpened all the time. And so there's at least three things happening. Number one, you rough up the stone and get it rough enough to work again. Number two, you make sure it's level. You'd have to have a big long stick. They put some kind of red lead on it and they rub it around and see where the high spots are. And number three, you have to make sure that the furrows are deep enough and formed properly so that they will aid in breaking up the wheat seeds. And the outer part, the outer third or so of the millstone was left absolutely flat and did the fine grinding. And you can see now on the left and in the rear that the millstones were inside of a sort of a barrel, which they called a hoop. And that was very important because as that upper millstone is rotating inside the hoop, it creates a draft, and that draft works like the hair blower, and it causes the meal to rush down through a downspout, and so it can be collected. Nobody has to scoop it like the maid behind the mill in the Bible. You know, air motion did the whole thing, and so and then you see there's a sort of a hopper, and leading to the hopper you may see some sort of a wooden pipe, you know, which was taking the grain from an upper story down into the hopper to fill it up. Now, if you fill that hopper up with about I believe it was 3 3/4 bushels of wheat, or it was a 4 3/4 bushels of wheat. It was. That would give you a 196 pound barrel of flour.
Wow.
In those days, you would get 38.5 pounds of flour from 60 pounds of wheat, 1 bushel. And the definition of a bushel of wheat to this day is 60 pounds. They don't measure it by volume. It's easier to measure it by weight. So there he is actually resurfacing one of his millstones. Okay, so that was an important part of the milling business, and sometimes you had a specialist who'd come around and do it for you. You didn't have to pay him. Now in the mill that I show, it was being run from 1850 on by a fellow called Jarvis Lefferts. The Lefferts family were often various kinds of mechanics, house builders, shipbuilders, and Jarvis Lefferts. There was a Jarvis family and a Lefferts family. You know how those English names are. Somebody's first name is the last name. But anyway, Jarvis Lefferts was such a handy guy, he probably did it himself, probably learned it. And he also introduced improvements in the mill, which is evident from the fact that he used overhead belting system, which was not completely original. So to try and restore that mill is a problem for people because at what period do you restore it? Do you want to restore it to how it was in the very beginning? Or do you want to restore it the way it was last used? And we can't even find out for sure because something happened when it wasn't used anymore and somebody buys the property and it's part of their country estate. Very wealthy people bought up all the North Shore waterfront properties, you know. And there was a family called the DeClarevilles, although they had other relatives. And the operative word then was nostalgia. Okay, now they had this old mill. There was even reports from older residents that occasionally they would turn on the mill to show their visitors. Well, it was still put together enough for that. This is something we have absolutely no proof of, but I could easily believe it. And so that was one of the reasons why they didn't do away with the building. Now over here, you see a picture of, let's see, there's the mill at that time when they had built a swimming dock that floats, and you see low tide. You can see that the mill wheel is out of the water now, right? And the swimming dock is down low, and you wouldn't want to go swimming because your feet would just stick in the mud, right? So there's the mill when it was, and the windows, by the way, all have nice double hung windows. Now they don't, they are very crude, they're just planks of wood, you know. Why do you suppose they had those nice windows? They could slide up and down like as good in your house. Well, in the winter time it was cold and the millers didn't want to be cold, right? So at one time this was a factory, and it was, now we're getting backwards again, going back to 1793. And what happened then was that a young fellow had married into the family, the Van Wyck family that owned the property. He had married one of the daughters of Captain Abraham Van Wyck. And he was a bit of a wheeler dealer, and in 1793 the price of flour and wheat went up because there was a demand from Europe. That was the year they chopped off Marie Antoinette's head and the King of France. And the new Republic of France, or whatever they called it in those days, was starting wars to spread their enlightened civilization through feudal Europe. And when you start a war, you need men, and the men come off the farm, and there's, or maybe other reasons, they didn't have enough. And to feed an army is a big deal. You need lots of bread, and of course wine if it's French. So people were exporting wheat and flour across the Atlantic, even though it was hazardous, you know, but with good luck, you got there in good shape, you could sell it for good money. So he says, okay, we'll build a mill. And he buys the property, gets permission from the town of Huntington, which is where I live, in the township, not in the town. So, and Abraham Van Wyck had a 500-acre farm. He had a few slaves and other probably tenant farmers. And he had money behind him. And 1443, there was 1,000 pounds British sterling is what would build a mill like that in those days. That was the standard price. So there was, in other words, the motivation for building the mill was, hey, we'll make lots of money. So it was designed to be a high production facility. And in 1793, there was something available to automate mills. You didn't need 4 men and a boy to run a mill like that, which was minimal. You could do it with 2 men if you had devices to move the product around without having to put it in batches and cart it around by hand. And who did that was Oliver Evans. Now, Oliver Evans was an engineer, an early engineer, and his family had been in flour milling, and he invented all sorts of devices that would automate the mill, allowing far fewer people to run it. Let's see if we can give you an idea of some of his diagrams from his book. He took time off from his business in Philadelphia, where he sold all the metal parts that you would need. You'd hire a carpenter and he'd put these metal parts into these wooden shafts and so on, and wherever you needed metal at the end of a shaft and so on, he'd sell you. And he'd also, he was like a consultant. He'd travel to your place and decide what kind of a wheel you needed, and what kind of canal you'd need to bring water to the wheel, and figure out the whole thing for you. And that was his business. And he took time off to write the book and have illustrations made. And this is, if you can enlarge that a little bit, we'll give it a try.
Is that?
Okay, all right, now, this is one of his illustrations showing these long belts with buckets on it. You can see on the left somebody is dumping wheat in, and it's being elevated, that's what he called it, an elevator, way up high in the building, where it's being spilled down into something that would start cleaning the wheat seeds, because threshing wasn't perfect. And then eventually it would go to all the way down, when it was clean, to the hoppers. You can see them near the bottom. And then the flour was collected, and at the very bottom you have something horizontal, which was like a Archimedes screw in a trough. You would move it sideways, and another set of buckets, you can see it a little off, just about center, a vertical set of buckets, would take the meal way up to the 3rd floor, dump it down to the right, upper right, and there was a device that Oliver Evans invented that would go round and round and rake it, which used to be done by a boy, by the way, to cool off the meal sufficiently so that it could then go down to those horizontal screens. That was a 6-sided horizontal screen with covered with silk, and the flour could fall through the holes of the silk, and the bran would be separated from it. And so you see, you have the process of elevating it to the grinder, elevating it to be cleaned, putting it down through the grinder, elevating it up again to be cooled, then putting it through the screen to be separated into various grades of flour. And of course the most desirable was what they call superfine, because you can do the best baking and cooking with it and so on. And by the way, there was a variety of particle sizes when you grind wheat. And the very large particles, you might think, well, sometimes a miller would just regrind them and get more fine flour. But you could take the larger particles and bake them twice, and you'd make sea biscuit, otherwise known as hardtack. And that was very much in demand for long voyages. The whalers went out to the Pacific with hardtack. And when I was a kid in the 1940s, a woman told me her husband had been in the Coast Guard, and on a voyage they ran out of food, and all they had to eat on the way back was hardtack. That's kind of amazing. In the 1940s, the Coast Guard still had hardtack. And by the way, in the Civil War, it wasn't just for ships. You could give hardtack to the Civil War soldiers because it lasted. Now, of course, there are stories about how it got wormy over the long voyages, and people would tap it on on the table to shake out the weevils before they ate it and things like that. But you know, as a matter of fact, and hardtack sea biscuit was also used by the Gloucester fishermen here in New England. Sometimes you might have to break it with a hammer, but they mix it with, they brought some cream and potatoes from land, and then they take codfish cheeks, and they would make a what do you call it? A chowder.
Yeah.
And
Fish
part of it,
chowder.
and you got your carbohydrates from hardtack broken up into the chowder. So there was a good market for hardtack. And by the way, let's not forget about bran. Now that fellow in Canada, the miller in Canada, told me that when they sold the bran to the farmers for their horses, they wouldn't sell them any bran unless they bought some flour too. That's how much the bran was desired for the horses. And they didn't call it bran, they called it feed. It was simply known as feed. So all parts were used. Eventually, in the 1880s or 90s, there was a certain Dr. Graham, you may have heard of, who decided at an early time then, you know, aside from all the fiber, there is something in bran that's good for you. Even you don't have to be a horse to get some nutrition from it. And so he put some of that into bread, and he called it Graham's bread. It was supposed to be healthier for you. Maybe it was. But nowadays, Graham crackers don't have any fiber to speak of, and it's a fraud. You know? Well, not intentional fraud, but it won't help you much. I like Graham crackers, but and Dr. Graham was quite a quack, as a matter of fact. If you ever look up Dr. Graham, you'll find out what kind of a quack he was. It's not really something to talk about. All right, so you have an idea about milling now and how tide mills work. So it might be a good time for questions. Yes.
Is this the Stony Brook mill?
No. Now, on Long Island, not too far from me, there's a mill at a place called Stony Brook. And that was an interesting mill. It's still there by the grace of God because the dam washed out with some flooding we had a couple of years ago. It was a beautiful little pond there. Everybody went there to see the ducks and the geese and so on. They're going to probably restore it, but it's very expensive. Anyway, one of the things from the Stony Brook mill that I learned was there was a lady who used to show it. All she did was grind corn there. That's not nearly as exacting work as grinding wheat, you know. You just make any kind of a mush out of corn and it's good enough. But she said at the end of the day, I just let a lot of corn down into the stones and it stops the mill. You know, and so, you know, you learn little by little as you're into this showing mills. You pick up little facts like that help you understand how the milling business worked, you know. As I mentioned before, you had to carefully regulate the flow of wheat into the stones. So here's an example of what happens when you overload the system. You know, you give it too much friction, it just can't do all the work. So anyway, Oliver Evans, pardon me.
It's okay.
Okay, Oliver Evans revolutionized the milling business, and however, stone grinding was, although it gives you whole wheat, was slow, and then water power eventually was supplanted by steam engines. Right, steam engines came into their own in America as early as what, 1820, and they not only powered steamboats but any other machinery, right, including mills. So that made water mills like this one that I show kind of obsolete. Now there were a few left, and people even then did appreciate the fact that you get a lot of good nutrition and maybe sometimes even better taste from whole wheat. But there's something called roller mills came along, and roller mills, yeah, let's do that one. Roller mills break up the wheat seed into pieces and then compressed air can clean them much more efficiently than any other method. Right, and, this happens to be a painting by a lady who was in the family of a larger mill in the area, only maybe a mile away. The Wood family, and this is one of, and you can see the mill wheel, and you can see a schooner that's beached on the mud at low tide, and that schooner could have gone right up to the door and loaded flour out of the mill. Remember, in those days, water transportation was far more important, and one of the great things about having a tide mill was a ship could come right up to it. So this is now on the right side, you can just barely see where the tide gates were, where the water came in to fill up the mill pond behind the mill. And where you see pastures now and some trees, and there's a haystack on the upper left, that's very expensive real estate. Okay, but there you have, that's the Van Wyck Lefferts Tidal Mill in Huntington, New York. And at high tide, we have the town launch bring us up to the first floor of the middle door, which is just hidden by the mast of the ship. And we go in the mill and then explain everything that I've been telling you. You can see a little overhang on the roof, front and back. And in those days, there was a little beam that came out there, and it had a rope, pulleys and so on that were powered through the mill wheel with the various connecting levers and rather gears and pulleys, belts and what have you, to raise up the grain on the back where it was delivered by wagon, and possibly to lift up perhaps a new millstone. The millwrights had the skill to get those heavy stones changed, you know. It's amazing that they could do it, but they must have done it. And as you see on the right side, there are people fishing, and where those tide gates are, you can just barely see it. Water would rush in to fill the mill pond, and smaller fish would get caught and rush in there, and the larger fish would hang out, and they still do, as the tide is coming in, trying to catch those smaller fish which have just been brought in. And so that was a good place to go fishing, apparently. And all mill ponds, you know, by law, had to be available to the public for hunting and fishing. Although in Huntington, it was only Huntington residents. They didn't want people coming down from Connecticut or anything like that, you know, fishing in their water. And also, every mill dam had to be a public highway. And there was even some places that rule it must be 18 feet wide, so 2 wagons could pass in opposite directions. Right next to the right of the building, you can't see it in this picture, but there's a wide place suitable for a wagon to turn around. Okay. You can see the first floor was called the meal floor because that's where the meal came down from the stones. And then it was elevated to the second floor, which is called the stone floor. And the third floor was the bin floor, where there were bins of wheat or possibly corn. And by the way, there's a lot of other materials, including buckwheat. Buckwheat was very popular, and people like to have their buckwheat pancakes soaked in butter every morning. Buckwheat was a very popular grain at that time. Some farmers grew nothing but buckwheat. Wheat itself was a cash crop for people, and you grow about as much as you could conveniently harvest. But after a while, wheat production moved out west more, and it moved across the Erie Canal by mules pulling barges, and then down the Hudson on those big sloops. And it was possible that by 1850 or so, the canal started in 1825, you could possibly buy wheat as cheap in New York City that came from out west as you could grow it on Long Island. What happened on Long Island was growing vegetables for New York City was more economical. And also, when you out in west where you weren't near woodlands, you had less pests bothering the wheat. But just to end the thing now, we talk about grist mills. A mill like that could average, I believe, around 1,000 pounds of flour a day. On a good day, could do much better, but there were other days when you were doing maintenance, or it was a holiday, or maybe the wheel was covered with ice in the winter, it couldn't operate. I believe it could put out about 6 or 8 barrels a day, and each barrel is close to 200 pounds. So if you only put out 5 barrels, you'd have 1,000 pounds. Could do a little better, but I'd say it averaged 1,000 pounds. Now, we have records from another mill in the area that was at least twice as big, maybe more, and from the year 1839. And in that year, New York City had roughly 225,000 people. Let's round it off to 200,000. Now, every person ate about half a pound of flour a day in one form or another, bread or cake or whatever. It averaged out to a half a pound for every person. So that 1,000 pounds that it produced in one day, on the average, would feed 2,000 people. Well, if there's 200,000 people in New York City, you'd need 100 mills like that to feed New York City. So flour milling was the #1 industry in the whole United States. All right, and it stayed the most valuable industry well into the 1800s, even past 1850, I believe. All right, so there's only one more thing I would show as there's a couple of other pictures here that you might like to see. A better picture of the mill with its mill pond. Okay, you see the tide gate area on the right, where you're looking from behind the mill now, and the cove itself is in the background. Okay, and let's see if I got this right. No, I'm wrong. No, we're looking inland. I'm sorry, and the water is flowing out of the mill pond as the tide is going down. So in other words, the bay is closest to us, and that's the mill pond with 15 or 16 acres. And you can see some houses that are built back in there on the shore behind. That's where all the expensive real estate is. The people who live there have an association. One of them's a smart lawyer, and he formed a nonprofit. So that nonprofit has an agreement with the historical society that the public can visit the mill. They own the mill now, and that guy was able to arrange with grants and so on, and they put up hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix up the building and just keep it in good shape. So I've been doing that over about 30 years as a volunteer. You can see the wide place to the right of the mill where the wagons could turn around. It's overgrown now, but at one time, of course, it wasn't. And so that's your Wyck Lefferts Tidal Grist. Let's see, what else? One of these things which is really not related to milling at all, but I sort of fond of it, and that is Jarvis Lefferts, who was the man who owned it, got himself one of these fine monuments made for himself, and he was a very economical fellow. He made a lot of the pulleys out of wood rather than use metal ones because he could do it cheaper. He had an interest in a woodworking factory in Huntington. And anyway, these things were made in Connecticut. I think it was in New Haven, and they're made of solid half-inch sheets of zinc, pure zinc, and it weathers to a beautiful bluish white. It's not like stone, which can degrade with the weather. You see Jarvis Lefferts, and on one side you can see an ear of corn, and now on the other side you can see. Let's get this set up the way we can manage it. You can see the sheaf of wheat. So he was the last miller, and I believe that he must have thought of himself as a miller because he had these things on his monument. And by the way, he was a house builder. We have houses built by him, and buildings built by him in Huntington. But running a mill is much more interesting than building a house. Once the house is done, it's done. In a mill, you're always maintaining it or thinking of improvements. So I think that he was the kind of man who found it a challenge. Interestingly, the Historical Society decided to drop the Van Wyck part of their organization and just call it the Lefferts Mill, which I don't think is right, but that's Jarvis Lefferts was the guy who ran it until sometime in probably late 1870s, and he died in 1882. So that's about all I can tell you.
Thank you, Lloyd.
And of course, you're welcome to take the books home, and if you want any extras, we have them here.
We do have this picture.
Yeah, well, that one-
That's our local.
Okay, this is some local mill which I don't know about.
It's right down here in Stockton.
Oh, well,
It
I don't-
was.
It was.
It
yeah.
was, yes.
What
Does this look
happened?
familiar to anybody?
What happened to it?
Yes.
Is it still there?
No, but the causeway is what you go across, and the tide, and the mill pond's still there, nobody's built on it.
There's a picture of both sides.
Yep. This little better picture of,
Well, you see,
this is all Stockton over here.
oh.
We're standing right about there.
Well, back in those days, nobody thought anything about the environment, and everybody would make a mill wherever there was falling water, because you could run a factory of all kinds. Whether it was a flour factory, or whether it was a sawmill, or whether it was anything else, once you have water power, that was what mattered. The steam engine changed that, but of course not entirely, because water power, after all, powers Niagara Falls electricity. And my mother, who was born at the turn of from the 1800s to late in 1899, said that her family in 1910, or roughly that time, had an electric stove because they had electricity from Niagara Falls.
wow.
So water power was always, but it didn't have, water power didn't have the same importance once you had electricity. And so that's why these tide mills have disappeared. Okay? Everybody is free to go home.
The picture is from where the tide mill was built between 1791 and 1798. In 1791, when there was surveying done on Cape Jellison, there's no mention of a mill at all. But in 1798, Robert Hitchman, who had acquired all of the Cape after the Revolution, sold part of his rights in the mill to two men. It was 45 acres, half of the mill dam, half of the mill, and half of all the machinery in the mill.
Wow.
And the two men who bought that half could not do a grist mill, and Robert Hitchman could not do a sawmill. So the two men who bought were going to be able to do the sawmill, and Robert Hitchman would do a grist mill, whether it was there or someplace else. But so that was when that tide mill that we know for sure was a tide mill
I see.
was
Well,
built.
I would be probably much more powerful than this tide mill because you have greater tides. So you have a bigger height of water. On Long Island, there was one mill not too far from Huntington, just a little west of it, where they had a fairly good drop of fresh water from a stream, but they added to that by the tide dropping another 8 feet. And so what they did was they ran an overshot wheel at low tide, because overshots are very efficient. And you can build an overshot wheel huge, like 30, 40 feet in diameter, and you have all the gravity doing the work, But you have to have a reliable source of water. But with a tide mill, the ocean is always there and the tide is always happening.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So that's tide mills.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you. Very interesting program.
Yes.
And we have refreshments in the other room, so anyone who is here is invited to join us for refreshments, and our business meeting will be in about 20 minutes, so.
Thank you.
Oh, that's very interesting.